Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the closing plenary of the virtual ASEF 2020. We're actually going to start this presentation by just sharing some of the key messages through a video and all the exciting things that have happened this week. So if you can roll that, please, go ahead. Wow. I uh, I looked at that video and it's amazing to see just a snapshot of all the things that have happened this week. And wow, I think I even need to watch it again when I see all those amazing messages. I really want to thank all the moderators and speakers and participants for bravely battling through a new approach and at times indeed some technical challenges that we have done this week. But indeed, we have also seen many benefits. Let me reflect on just one. In today's session, we have speakers calling in from Thailand, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, Australia, and I'm actually moderating from Canada. This reflects some new ways that we can work together, pushing us in many ways, especially I find myself, to adopt virtual approaches to still get the needed work done that we have to do in Asia and the Pacific. Well, right now, I'd like to move on to some keynote speakers. We have two excellent speakers, and it's not over this week yet as we learn more about some of the great things that are happening in Asia and the Pacific and some challenges. Let me first introduce Ms. Alice Jabana. She's the Undersecretary General of the United States Nations and the Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Executive Secretary Alice Jabana, I hand it over to you now.
Thank you very much, David. Distinguished participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak at the closing plenary of the Asia Clean Energy Forum 2020. At the outset, I would like to express my appreciation to the Asian Development Bank and other organizers of this important forum for making this virtual week a great success. The forum serves as a critical call to action for sustainable energy transition under the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and a wake-up call to scale up efforts to achieve clean energy future across Asia Pacific region and beyond. Through my interactions with leaders and senior policymakers, I recognize the growing urgency to address climate change by accelerating the clean energy transition in the context of COVID-19 recovery plan. Climate change poses a dire threat to human lives and societies, and it highlights the need for continued preparation and robust crisis response systems. The COVID-19 outbreak has caused severe negative pressures on the socio-economic dimensions of SDGs in our region. With varying degrees of impacts and lockdown measures, governments are focused on controlling the spread of the pandemic in one hand and ensuring smooth revival of economic activities on the other hand. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the availability of modern and affordable energy has transformed the Asia Pacific region, helping countries to build their economies and lifting millions out of poverty, as highlighted in ESCAP report on energy transition pathways for the 2030 agenda in Asia Pacific. At the regional level, there is continued reliance on polluting and carbon-intensive sources of energy. For example, the Asia-Pacific region accounts for almost 60% of global total CO2 emissions, nearly two-thirds of which are from energy sector. Furthermore, the Asia-Pacific region accounted for about 80% of the world's coal consumption in 2018. During the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' visit to our region last year, he called upon member states to end their reliance on coal. The Secretary General also emphasized the need for imposing tax on carbon emissions, put an end to the trillions of dollars worth of estimated subsidies for fossil fuels, and a stop to construction of new coal-fired power stations if we are to stand a chance of ending the climate crisis. In the context of the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, we see both risks and opportunities. The risks are the potential of declining investment in renewable and energy efficiency, supply chain issues, and the policy focus shifting away from sustainable and low carbon energy. But the opportunities derive from the enormous potential for clean energy to form the mainstay of the economic stimulus packages announced by member states. Let us consider how we can turn these risks into opportunities as we implement the Paris Agreement and 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I would like to highlight three possible focus areas. First is to scale up investment in renewable energy projects, more efficient buildings, and electric vehicles in order to advance national and global goals on emission and sustainability, create high quality jobs, and reinvigorate economies. There is a need for the stimulus packages in developing countries to focus on rural and community sustainable energy infrastructure development, such as improved access to electricity and clean cooking. We must ensure inclusion, particularly of vulnerable groups and stakeholders in all these recovery policies and strategic investment planning. Second is to assist member states in rationalizing fossil fuel subsidies firmly on their energy planning agenda. This will not only level the playing field for clean energy, but free up fiscal space for the stimulus efforts. The most opportune time to do is now, when the oil prices are at historic low. Third is to support member states in building back better in the post-COVID-19 recovery plan. Recently, we have developed socio-economic response to COVID-19 FCAS framework that underscored the importance of energy transition and decarbonization in the overarching framework of building back better. We urge governments in the Asia-Pacific region to integrate their responses to COVID-19 with their clean energy targets and long-term efforts to combat climate change. This will create, transform, and resilient societies with stronger health systems, ensure fewer people living in extreme poverty, more gender equality, and a greener environment for all. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the current crisis offers a unique opportunity for our regional leadership to reflect on our relationship with the nature and environment. Reductions in carbon emissions and pollution during the COVID-19 outbreak have given the environment the needed breathing space. Going forward, our socio-economic response could serve as a turning point for member states to create enabling policy and regulatory environments within an integrated framework that are more resilient against future pandemics and crises, particularly on their implications to energy and climate change. ESCAP stands ready to collaborate and leverage the Asia Clean Energy Forum and other regional fora to learn from each other's best practices, knowledge, and experience of policymakers. Let me reiterate that I am fully committed to encourage stronger regional partnership in delivering solution-oriented strategies in advancing energy transition and sustainable development goals in Asia and the Pacific. Thank you for your attention. I wish you a very successful forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this encouraging message, Executive Secretary Alish Chabana. I think it is great to look at this as an opportunity of how we can build back better, as you've indicated. And thank you again for the partnership that we have together with UNESCAP and ADB. Now, your closing themes of Build It Back Better is a great segue into our next keynote speaker, Dr. Ilan Noy, who's the chair in the Economics of Disasters and Climate Change at Victoria University of Wellington. And he has actually published a paper with ADB exactly on that topic. So now, Dr. Noy, I turn it over to you.
Hey, David and everybody else who is attending this conference, thank you very much for inviting me to to provide some input into the discussions. Indeed, what I would like to talk about is Build Back Better, but from a specific economic lens, because I apologize, I am an economist. I'm also from New Zealand, and I thought I would use the opportunity to put a picture of my prime minister so that her glow will maybe rub on my talk as well. When we talk about economic recovery, right now we're talking about this alphabet of possibilities, whether it's going to be a V-shaped or a U-shaped recovery. So a V-shaped is a very quick rebound, a U-shaped is a rebound, but it takes a bit longer, a W-shape because we have a second wave potentially, a second wave because of the COVID-19 or because of the withdrawal of support. And then there is the possibility of an L-shaped recovery. My talk is not really about whether we will be in a V or a W or an L or a U, but rather where we will end up at the end, so that the final recovery. And a different way to think about that, when we think about a disaster, we talk about the immediate impact of the disaster on the economy, and then as a result of that, the impact in this case, it's both the virus and the responses by governments, the policies, and the decisions of individuals what to do. That results in a lot of losses in this case, a lot of indirect losses, these short-term losses to the economy, and eventually we end up with some kind of a long-term equilibrium or a state. And that is the focus of what I would like to sort of briefly talk about today, which is a different way to think about it is if you have read Alice in Wonderland, Alice asks, where should she go? She asks the Cheshire cat, where should she go? And the cat responds, well, it depends on where you want to go. And Alice says, well, I don't really care where I go, in which case the cat responds, then it doesn't really care. It doesn't really matter which way you go. You can go either way. And I think that to some extent represents the way we typically think about recovery. We don't formulate carefully enough where we want to end up at the end of this recovery, which means that basically whichever way we go, we can eventually say that we have arrived without thinking whether we have arrived at where we wanted to go. So in a project that we did with the World Bank, we tried to think, okay, what do we want to emphasize when we are thinking about the Building Back Better? And we decided we want to emphasize 4 dimensions. The first one is safety. We want the world to be safer after we have recovered from this event. We also want a recovery that is fast and doesn't take too long, because we know that prolonging it will mean that it is going to be deeper and more costly. We also want the recovery to be inclusive, so that everybody is on board, and maybe even more than just making sure that the tide lifts all boats, but actually making sure that those at the bottom are lifted more, and we worry about them more than those at the top. And the 4th dimension is the future. We want to make sure that the recovery also has the future in its vision, so that we have future opportunities and future to look forward to, because we know that largely dictates what we do in terms of the economy today. So things like investment are largely driven by what expectations about the future are. So what I want to focus on is these last 2, the idea of inclusiveness and fairness, and the idea of future opportunities. When we think about fairness in the case of COVID-19, unlike where we know that where most of the confirmed cases are, the economic risk from this event actually sits in very different places. So this is a map of where the economic risk from COVID-19 is. And as you can clearly see, the economic risk from COVID-19 is largely in areas that are poorer and more exposed to the various economic impacts of the disease, rather than the areas which have most of the disease cases at the moment. So we see Sub-Saharan Africa, we see South Asia, Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea, for example, and places around there. And that's where the economic risk is. And the economic risk is there because of low income. And this is also true within countries where the economic risk from this event is with low income. And this is at all three stages of the event. That the direct damages from this event we know are affecting the more vulnerable populations. We know that the short-term losses from this event are being experienced more at people whose job is being, for example, who've found themselves unemployed, and we know that that's frequently low-income individuals. And we also know from past events that the recovery is much more difficult for those who don't have the resources to it. So we need to think about that idea of fairness and inclusivity in all these stages of the recovery process. And it's not good enough to say, well, it will just happen. Our first priority is to recover, and it's only a secondary matter who is recovering better, and so on. We actually want, and we know that from past experiences, we need to make this idea of inclusivity and fairness an integral and central part of the recovery rather than an afterthought, because without that, we will end up with a recovery that does leave people behind. About the future, John Kenneth Galbraith said that the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look a bit respectable. So I'm not following Galbraith's advice. I'm not going to really try to forecast the future or tell you where the future is going to be. But there is one thing we know that the future holds, and that's climate change. A lot of other things we don't know. We don't know what the shape of the workplace will be in 10 or 20 years' time. We have no idea what all these changes that we've experienced in the last few months, how sustainable they are and how much more we will experience them. But we do know that climate change is real and it will happen, and we know exactly, we don't know maybe exactly at the speed and the quantity that it will happen, but we know exactly the trajectory is going forward. So in that sense, actually, preparing for climate change is actually one of the more certain things that we know we need to do in order to guarantee our future. And of course, there are a lot of other benefits other than worrying about climate change. It provides a lot of other benefits. So clean energy provides a lot of other benefits that it's important to remember them. But when we look at the opportunity that this disaster and that the executive secretary has already mentioned, we know, and this is a quote from Rahm Emanuel, who used to be the mayor of Chicago. He said, "Never let a good disaster go to waste." This is a bit crass to say that, but it is also very, very true. This crisis is an opportunity for us to do a lot of things, especially because of the massive amounts of government funding and international funding that is going towards the recovery. So we see in that recovery, we see a lot of bad policy, we see some good policies, and we see some ugly policies, ones we are not really comfortable with, but might actually be okay. The bad ones are clear. So, the airline bailouts and the subsidies for coal and oil industries that some governments are providing are clearly counterintuitive if one goal that we want to have to pose is reducing the future climatic change. There are some good policies. Sadly, I think if you look at across countries in terms of the good policies, the kind of investment in green infrastructure and in other environmental goods, we don't observe that much of it. And I think that to some extent, the panel later on will focus on that. Why exactly don't we observe more of that? Or at least that is my hope that this panel will focus on. And then we observe some policies that we're not as sure of. For example, some corporate bailouts, and there are a lot of corporate bailouts. We are uncomfortable with that, but of course the big corporations employ a lot of people. And if they are employing a lot of people, then maybe it makes sense to bail them out, of course. But we understand that in some cases, maybe the bailouts for the corporates might not be exactly the right policy. And here, the devil is in the details. I think the same is true when we're envisioning supports for individuals. In some cases, these policies are designed in ways that are productive and will enable a build back better future. and they are, for example, they are fair. In some cases, they are not. In some cases, there's more subsidies provided to individuals with high income than low income. And we need to examine all these things according to those 4 parameters, whether they are making the world a safer place, where they're fast enough, they're delivered fast enough, whether they're inclusive and fair, and whether they are providing for the future. And I think I will end that intervention at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Noy. I think that was a very interesting perspective, and I think it really offers the challenge of how we can find a positive way to recover this and as you say, build it back better, which is a term that is sometimes difficult to really define practically. So I look forward to hearing your participation also in the panel and the other panelists later in this session. At this time, I'd like to bring forward a polling question that we can ask the audience. And what we've done actually is we've used the exact same polling question from the opening session. So you'll be able to access that while watching the video feed at either the polling button at the top or the bottom of your screen. What we're asking again is, what is the most important energy sector consideration during recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic? Is it building energy infrastructure for economic recovery and growth? Is it enhancing energy sector resilience to future crises, including market, climate, and maybe future pandemics? Is it achieving energy access for all and energy security? Or should we focus on climate change mitigating energy supply and demand technologies? So we've just been discussing all kinds of things about the energy sector over the week, and so we'd like to hear your views on this and see if they've changed anything. So now, so we'll leave this poll open for the next 2 recorded messages, so you can consider your response to that. And then now I'd like to go forward. We have 2 recorded messages this time. And the first one is from Lord Callanan, who's the Minister for Climate Change and Corporate Responsibility for the UK government, who's going to share some of the work that the UK is doing in this area, but also to highlight their leadership for COP26 coming up. So if you could run that video, please.
It's a pleasure for me to be here with you all today, even if it is virtually, and I hope that you and your families are safe and well. And thank you to the Asian Development Bank for this event, a great testament to your power to bring a variety of us stakeholders together. I would like to begin with a very clear statement that the economics of low-carbon technology have changed. Investing in clean technology now makes clear financial sense. And this means that we can say with absolute confidence that the clean energy transition is as possible as it is necessary. Over the past 10 years, we've seen the cost of renewables plummet. Technologies like wind and solar now provide consumers in some countries with the cheapest electricity going. For the past 2 months in the UK, we haven't used coal to produce a single watt of electricity, compared to a decade ago when it was powering something like 40% of our energy. But as I hope you all know, our ambitions in this area aren't just domestic, they're international. Climate change is the ultimate global issue. Rising seas, extreme weather take no notice of natural. The UK is committed to playing its part in tackling it, working across the world to make sure that everyone has access to secure, affordable, clean energy is a critical part of that. And we're working with partners internationally to make that a reality. We've shown leadership in mission innovation, for example, a global initiative of 24 countries and the European Commission to accelerate clean energy innovation across the world. We're collaborating and sharing our experiences with other countries to support just energy transitions across the world. We're doubling our official development assistance for climate change to 11.6 billion over the next 5 years. including $1 billion for clean energy innovation to support research, development and demonstration in developing countries under the ETN Fund, as announced last year. And I'm pleased to say that we're working in proud partnership with the Asian Development Bank across Asia. UK funding is supporting many diverse projects. For example, the integration of clean energy in the Cook Islands, energy auditing in industry in Bangladesh, wind power generation in Sri Lanka, development of carbon capture, usage and storage, and providing wider development aid for green finance for energy efficiency in the region, amongst many other things. But although there's a lot of great work going on, I think we all know that much more needs to be done. The science tells us that we must plan to halve global emissions in the next decade, which means countries setting ambitions 5 times greater than those in existing nationally determined contributions. And this is absolutely critical. Existing commitments will lead us to a 3 degrees C rise in global temperatures, when we need to get a rise well below 2 degrees C. So therefore we must do more. And I believe that recent events show us all that we can. The coronavirus pandemic has had a devastating impact across the globe, but it has also shown how the world can work together to tackle a common challenge. And it provides an opportunity to build back better, to ensure that our recovery is both clean and resilient. The discussions that we've had this week have made clear that clean energy innovation is going to be essential to this green rebuilding. And the UK has been very pleased to lead many workshops on this topic. We can all choose to support clean technologies as we make choices over the coming months on the investment, on the planning, on the policy that we need to rebuild our economies. And this means investing in industries and infrastructure that can turn the tide on climate change. It means making the most of the opportunities for clean economic growth and for jobs that these sectors can deliver. And it means productivity, shaping our economies so that they can withstand the impacts of global temperature rises. We want this to be central to our presidency of COP26 in partnership with Italy. We plan to use the opportunity to help focus our recovery on climate action, to help ramp up momentum for rebuilding resilient and cleaner economies, to mobilize global climate action through collaboration with our international partners across Asia and around the world, to push every country to come forward with long-term plans and ambitious targets, and to mobilize financial support and increase sustainable private financial flows. Because the transition that we're talking about requires a whole economy approach. I don't think any of us here today are naive about the scale of the challenges that we face, but I hope that we are all equally optimistic that as a world we can meet those challenges. This crisis has shown that rapid and coordinated international action is possible, that the world can pull together to tackle a common challenge. We have to continue in that spirit as we approach COP26 and beyond to ensure a clean, resilient recovery. I believe that we can, and I believe that we will. Thank you.
Well, that was a very encouraging message from Lord Callahan from the UK government. And I think it's really important as we enter into this recovery stage, can we see a real tipping point as we go towards COP26, where again, the international community comes together to really see how we can move forward in meeting global climate goals. So thank you very much for that message. Now, again, looking forward again, and we're going to hear a message from Juniper Neal, Deputy Director, Regional Development Mission for Asia at USAID. And she's going to share an announcement on the Water and Energy for Food Ag Energy Prize. So if you can roll that message, please.
Congratulations to everyone on yet another successful Asia Clean Energy Forum. I've had the pleasure of participating in many of this week's events right here from my home in Alaska. I know many of you may be listening right now from around the world. Congratulations to the Asian Development Bank for adapting to ensure that this forum remains relevant, timely, and accessible during these challenging times. The United States is a long-standing partner in this coalition, and I'd like to thank both ADB and the Korea Energy Agency for your ongoing leadership and partnership. To foster ingenuity and innovation across Asia, last year we launched the Water and Energy for Food Prize under our Asia Edge program in partnership with the governments of Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands. The prize recognizes and rewards promising innovators at the nexus of renewable energy and agriculture. We've prepared a short video to announce the prize winners and introduce you to their amazing work. The prize recognizes both winners for their potential to contribute large-scale, clean energy-driven impact to Asia's food security. Please enjoy the video.
Investing in innovative food security solutions powered by renewable or sustainable energy is critical to Southeast Asia's future economic growth and resilience. Asia Edge and the Water and Energy for Food Grand Challenge addresses this need. The We4F Grand Challenge is a partnership between the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the Foreign Ministry of the Netherlands, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, and the U.S. Agency for International Development. Through the Asia Edge Ag Energy Prize, the challenge offers financial rewards and mentoring services to businesses and entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia, developing game-changing innovations at the nexus of water, renewable energy, and food. This year, we heard from over 70 innovators in Southeast Asia. Today, we're pleased to showcase our winners whose cutting-edge ideas will help to steer Southeast Asia toward a more sustainable, secure, and inclusive food and energy future. Our grand prize winners share their responses to the award.
This is half underground and half above. And what you do here is you mix your manure with water and pour it into this side of the biodigester, and then it produces gas which builds up in the middle of the system, and then fertilizer which comes out this side, which you can use on your rice paddy, your vegetables, or your fruit trees, etc. And just like an LPG setup, you have your kitchen stove here. And as you can see, you have a really nice plate which you can use for cooking. And then here in our rice cooker, which is a biogas rice cooker, just like an electric one, the biogas lights up, cooks your rice, and when it's done, just switches itself off.
A huge thank you to everyone involved in We4F. I also wanted to say a personal thank you to the ATEC family who do an awesome work every day to continue to grow ATEC. Our goal at the end of 5 years is to have a positive impact on the lives and income of 45,000 beneficiaries. In doing so, you'll see our green biodigesters covering approximately 12% of villages nationwide. This prize money will be used to make this vision a reality.
We serve businesses, organizations, and households to create a closed-loop circular economy, zero-waste solutions. All of your waste, your clothes, your plastic, your cans, you name it, all the waste will be recycled. We are recycling more than 120 tons per month, and 160,000 people currently at the moment are using our service. We are now creating a marketplace where the household can recycle the waste, and they will even get paid to recycle the waste.
Thank you for Asia Edge and Energy Prize for giving us a chance to win the first prize, the U Innovator Prize. We will be using all of our funding for waste to energy project, waste to biogas, biomass. We would like to thank you very much.
The prize sponsors are delighted to congratulate the winning entrepreneurs and to recognize the excellent work being done by so many innovators across Asia. The prize will help the winners mobilize private investment to implement modern energy technologies, ultimately expanding market opportunities in renewable energy for securing food systems. On behalf of USAID, I'd like to thank you again for your commitment to our joint vision for a sustainable future. We look forward to continuing our partnership with all of you as we carry forth the ideas and passion generated during the Asia Clean Energy Forum. Thank you.
Well, that's some very exciting technologies that we've seen that are going to be supported by the sponsors of that prize. And the other reflection on that is to see the cross-sector nature, looking at that energy and agriculture nexus. I think that's really exciting, and I hope that the panel discussion will touch on some of those elements and how we can look for those cross-sector opportunities. So thank you to USAID for sharing that. Now, if I can ask the polling results to be displayed from the poll that we just ran. Thank you. I think this is very interesting. I think the shares, again, have focused, like the opening, on energy sector resilience, as well as on climate change. We're seeing this real interest in resilience in the energy sector as a result of seeing COVID-19 have such an impact on our economies, on our energy systems, on our life in general. But then also still a strong showing on the climate change side of things. And really, if we combine the resilience and the climate change, that's over 70% of the votes. And then, of course, energy access, of course, is not left last, but rather the focus on the economy. So I found that really interesting again, and I'd say a stronger push in that direction following the week of discussions that we've had. So thank you for sharing that. I now want to turn this over to Mr. Ashok Bhagarva, who's the director of the Central Asia Energy Department at ADB and chair of our Energy Sector Committee, who's going to moderate a panel with a number of speakers. So Ashok, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, David, and hello, everyone. Very pleased to meet you all virtually. I'm sure you have heard how disruptive this COVID-19 has been and its significant impacts on ongoing energy transition. Let me illustrate that through some data or numbers and some key indicators. First, on 20th of April this year, for the first time in history, the oil prices went into negative territory. Around the same time, natural gas became price competitive with coal in many markets in Asia. Air quality improved, CO2 emissions declined. But at the same time, billions of us were restricted at home. Nearly all transportation came to a halt, or at least more than 90% or thereabout. Very few industries were operational. So I believe between these two scenes lies our future energy challenge. That is, how do we get those same environmental outcomes while economic activities are fully back on? And how do we make our energy system, and this point has been reinforced by you and in the survey at the opening session as well as today, how do we make our energy system more resilient to similar shocks in future? I'm delighted to have 4 powerful speakers to share their insights and experience on this issue of future direction for energy sectors. I'm going to invite them one by one. They will give their opening remarks, and then we get into subsequent discussion. So let me first invite Hongpeng Liu. He is leading the energy team in UN Escape to promote regional cooperation with focus on implementation of SDG 7 under SDG 2030 and also the Paris Agreement. Mr. Liu.
Thank you very much, Ashok. for this opportunity to discuss about these future directions for energy sector. As you said, at the moment, we are in the junction. We will see, how to build back better because this COVID-19 crisis. At the same time, we have also to deliver our commitment for 2030 agenda for sustainable development, and also to meet the target of the Paris Agreement. So I think focus on these questions you pose for this panel discussion. The first, what are the energy needs changing in the ADB's developing member countries? So I really think if you look at just now, David showed the results of the public polling, which shows most people, this over 70, interested or take these issues as resilience for energy sector for future crisis, and also the climate change and the energy sector. At the same time, we also see energy access is still on the list. But if you look at 10 years ago, probably the situation was different. The energy access maybe come out at the first top priority because a lot of people still without access to electricity. I have a number in 2000. In Asia and Pacific, the electricity access is less than 80% for the population. But until last year, it's 96 population already access to electricity. And also at the same time, if you see the quality of energy services is improving. But of course, there's a great potential. We still need to improve this reliability and affordability. But it doesn't mean so that we meet the expectations. Early this year, we worked with the ADB, with Yongping's team, just did this review for SDG 7. We found that still there are 200 million population in Asia and Pacific without access to electricity, and 1.8 billion population in Asia without access to clean cooking. I think energy access is still a big challenge. If you look at the 2030 agenda, by 2030, universal access to electricity and clean cooking, we cannot meet that target if we go business as usual. So that means we have to do something to accelerate the process to achieve this, especially for clean cooking by 2030. So that is a really big challenge. And also at the same time, we see the absolute renewable energy capacity increase rapidly, especially in Asia. But if you look at the renewable energy share in the energy mix, it's actually declining. So my number in 2000, that's around 16% of the total primary energy supply from renewables. But in 2017, that's declined to less than 12%. Of course, there's also statistics like consideration, for example, the traditional biomass. Probably that was calculated as renewable, so that was one factor. Second factor, because the increase of energy consumption and the supply. But still, it's far away from the target we set up to achieve renewable energy in the energy mix. And what do we do to head on the right direction? I think the keynote speaker, like my executive secretary, and also Professor Noy also mentioned very well about the future direction. We really need to take this crisis as an opportunity to build back better. The first, I think, it's opportunity to use this recovery process to build this, to develop this recovery as a kind of a green, climate neutral, and sustainable and inclusive development opportunity. So that is always with a green recovery. At the same time, we also need to see how ADB can support the member countries to develop a kind of mechanism to optimize their fossil fuel subsidies. So I really think this is a good opportunity, the opportunity arising because of the low oil price. So that is also where the subsidies for fossil fuels can be optimized through the efforts if we work together with the member countries. And finally, I also want to mention about the coal consumption. So we have to find a way and to stop this kind of increase of consumption of coal, especially coal power plant. At the moment, I see there's also opportunity because the declining cost of the renewables. At the same time, if you look at the largest coal consumption country, like for example, in China, so the overcapacity of a thermal power plant, that could be also one opportunity how to improve the current efficiency, to improve the capacity of the existing power plant, and to stop building new thermal power plant from coal. So I really think that is also a good opportunity, maybe through ADB's financial support investment, could send a clear signal to the market, to the private sector, how the investment should go to green and climate friendly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. Next, let me invite again Dr. Ilan Noy, who already spoke earlier in the session, and he will talk to us about politics of climate-friendly policies in the time of COVID. Ilan.
Yes, thank you very much, Ashok. I just want to raise one point, and that is that Build Back Better is a fairly new phrase. It was actually started to be used after the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. But of course, the aspiration to have a recovery that brings us to a better place is much older than that. But when we look historically, it's very difficult to find instances in which an economy or a society experienced a large shock and came much, much better because of that. So Build Back Better is a nice aspiration, but historically we see very few examples of it. So I think it's important to realize that, because we then realize that we actually have a challenge that is not easy, and we need to keep sort of our eyes on the ball if we want to really be able to push this idea of using this COVID-19 as an opportunity to do things that we thought we want to do, that we think we want to do, like, for example, the clean energy goals that we've mentioned here. And I think here it's important to understand a bit the politics involved. One reason, of course, we don't observe Build Back Better is that there is a very strong push always to recover as quickly as possible. And the quickest way to recover from any shock is to go back to business as usual as quickly as possible. And that's why most of the efforts by governments to this date on the COVID-19 recovery has been to get back to people to work as they did before, to get back to business as usual. And then what typically happens is we, after the fact, realize that we have missed an opportunity. We have missed an opportunity to do some things in different ways that will get us to this Build Back Better aspiration. The other thing I think that is unique to this event, maybe, because it is so global and so large, is that a lot of times the governments are a bit reluctant to push very agendas that they might perceive to be controversial, because they feel they want to. This event united us so much; it affected everyone. So they are reluctant to institute radical change because they are worried about being criticized, that they are using this disaster or this crisis as an opportunity. And I think to some extent I would want to overcome those trepidations, because, for example, and several of the speakers have already mentioned rationalizing subsidies for energy sources that are carbon intensive. I wouldn't say that we need to rationalize them. I think we need to abolish them. And maybe rationalize is a euphemism, but if it is, then we need to be explicit about it. But again, the point is, governments are reluctant to undertake radical change, But without radical change, we are not going to be at the Build Back Better state when we come out of this crisis. So I think it's important to remember that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ilan. I think your point is very well taken. Now, next, I will invite my colleague from ADB, first Sujata Gupta, who is leading ADB's energy and transport team, sustainable infrastructure team in our East Asia department. Sujata.
Thank you, Ashok. And I agree with all the previous speakers that, of course, we have to move towards a green, resilient growth path for energy. But I'd like to take a more ADB view of this and try to respond to the three questions that are there in the agenda. So if we look historically, energy has three phases. The first phase is the basic infrastructure being built. The second one is how to do this cleanly and more efficiently, that is moving away from coal and towards renewable, reducing losses and transmission. And then the third phase is demand side efficiency. Now, when we look at the demand side efficiency, this cuts across all sectors. And then it becomes very difficult to define a pure energy sector. Now, when we look at electric vehicles, are we talking about the energy sector or are we talking about the transport sector? So, and also as incomes increase, demand for energy increases. So for example, in the past, energy for cooling used to be a relatively small share, and we find that cooling energy demand is now increasing as income levels increase. Of course, these three phases are not distinct, they are not discrete, they overlap. But we do find that our developing member countries have a certain phase predominating, and then they have different energy challenges, if you like, or different issues prevailing or dominating at a certain time. So one role for ADB is to be able to leapfrog and move economies directly onto a cleaner and more efficient energy path. Now, here I'd like to mention the PRC. PRC is really leading the way as an indicator how energy needs will evolve. The country has very adequate basic infrastructure, but it still needs to improve its energy efficiency. It still needs to deliver clean energy to remote and rural areas. And as mentioned, cooking energy needs to be cleaned up. And all this must be done in a sustainable manner. And this requires new business models and policies. And that's again a role for ADB. Coming to the second question, how is ADB reacting to this? So firstly, as I mentioned earlier, different developing countries are in different stages of development. So ADB has to be flexible to meet the requirements of different developing member countries. And in those DMCs, which are beyond the first phase of development, that is, they have adequate infrastructure, then we need to develop new business and financing models such that we can flatten and keep the growth path of energy green and clean. So again, an example from the PRC, we are working through financial intermediaries to access small and medium scale enterprises. And we are, through the financial intermediary, extending loans, guarantees, equity, and even helping leasing companies. And then the next point, to make it sustainable, we have to develop capacity on the ground. And this knowledge that is gained through the first few projects that we support has to be shared not only at the project level or the province level or at the country level, but across all the DMCs. Now, what do we need to do now to get into this? I think ADB is already doing what requires to be done. We have ADB's long-term strategy 2030, where they preempted this change, that energy is no longer going to be restricted to one sector. And instead of having operational sector priorities, our operational priorities are now focusing on thematic areas. So for example, climate change, disaster resilience, and environmental sustainability is one of the 7 operational priorities, or making cities more livable, or yet still addressing poverty and reducing inequalities remains one of our 7 priorities. Therefore, in my view, the way forward is to take a more cross-sector approach, not really just an energy sector approach, and to have clean and resilient energy. Of course, having this multi-sector approach makes it more challenging and more complex, but that's exactly an area where ADB can add value. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sujata. Let me continue and invite the last panelist, Priyanta Vijaytunga, who is leading ADB's energy team in our South Asia operation, which by far is the largest operational department for energy in ADB. Priyanta.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ashok. I fully agree with all previous speakers. Actually, I don't know what else can I add. I can add to the list of things. Apart from the fact that, obviously COVID-19 has been an eye-opener for everybody, not just in the energy sector, but in all the sectors. And as David quite rightly showed, the energy sector resilience has become right at the top, way above everything else, because people believe energy is obviously a basic need, and you have to make sure that it is resilient under any of these, disasters and pandemics. So the angle, what I would like to bring in is the reality on the ground. And, we obviously, all of us believe that, and even these countries believe that the low carbon development is a must. It's inevitable. There is no other choice. And, if you look at all these developing member countries we have, everybody has policies, strategies, and roadmaps towards that. The important thing is that in reality, on the ground, what really happens. Now, we have quite a few challenges, and Dr. Noy actually listed out some of them. And for instance, fossil fuel still seems to be cheaper in these countries. Frankly, if you look at coal, I'm not promoting coal, but if you look at coal, coming to one of our DMCs, all the subsidies are basically not within the country, but outside the country. When coal comes to the port, it has a price, and if you put that price, it is cheaper as against others. That's an issue we have. So fossil fuel subsidies outside the control of individual countries is a problem which we have to seriously take into account. And the other, obviously, all these guys are locked into traditional generation planning and process of operation models. This cannot change overnight. The systems are there. They are kind of almost stranded assets, and we have to deal with them. And the other is, in fact, the perception of what you call this stability, reliability without these traditional power plants. Obviously, all of us know all these this can be addressed with the existing technologies. Then comes the cost. What are the costs associated with bringing in these technologies? Because we are dealing with a system which are existing. We are not, COVID-19 did not destroy the energy systems in these countries. They are there. In fact, frankly speaking, energy systems perform quite well, and they have been very resilient, frankly. So that's a challenge we face when we move towards a low carbon development, in the energy sector. Of course, we can go into, Sujata very well explained what ADB can do. One important thing we can do is to take leadership. In the sense, in these countries, one good thing, unlike in the past, most of these countries have already understood the need to go for low carbon development, and they know the impacts of it, the global, environmental, local environmental issues, also some other social issues involving fossil fuels. And that's a good thing. 10 years ago, they were not really aware. They were aware of it. They did not really, it was not their concern. Now they are really concerned. So we can provide leadership, use that to basically drive these countries towards a low carbon development. That leadership is very, very important. They may, as Dr. Noy quite rightly said, the governments, the politicians may not take this risk at this time. Probably we have to find ways and means of supporting them and to take that leadership. And then the rest is actually the financing side. As Sujata quite rightly said, we have also some different financing mechanisms and tools, and we can bring in private sector. All what we have to do is to bring in more and more capital, private sector investment. That we can do from ADB side. So I'll stop there because I don't want to exhaust all my points at this stage. Back to Ashok, please.
Thank you, Priyanta. I'm glad that you have more points, and I'll come back to you in a minute. I'll first go to Mr. Hongpeng Liu. Now, COVID has a negative impact on SDG 7, neutral, or do you see there is an upside or a positive impact out of this onto SDG 7? Of course, there's we are quite far away from the timeline in terms of 2030, but given the trajectory, it was already behind. Do you think we have a risk of falling back more? Mr. Liu.
Yes, Ashok, thank you. That's a good question. I think from short term, that's a negative impact because the government need to divert all these resources to invest in the recovery or in even the emergency, to address the emergency. That means the public fund will be a shortage. At the moment, a lot of developing countries, I think they use their full kind of capacity to deal with this COVID-19 crisis. But as I said earlier, and all the countries recognized this is also an opportunity. The opportunity is not go back to business as usual. I agree with Professor Noy. That's the cheapest way to go business as usual. But I think this crisis is also a wake-up call. And a wake-up call for us to have to pay attention for the human nature and the sustainable development. If you see, the cause of this crisis, it's from like I think the nature, revenge to the human development, because you see the urbanization, which actually, eat a lot of this kind of forestry, and also the environment was polluted, the water was polluted, a lot of damage to the environment. That caused one of the causes for this kind of health crisis. But we are aware, the climate will be another crisis, not far away from us. So this is, I think, the positive side from this COVID-19. Wake up call for government, for human beings. We have to pay greater attention. Start from now. Don't go back to business as usual. We have to find what is the best option, innovative option to go to support economic growth. At the same time, to really leave this to just poverty reduction, to support those vulnerable groups, to achieve this kind of SDG goals. I really think that provide a positive side, like to just alert the human being we have to go the path differently for future development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. So short time setback, but it's a wake-up call, and potentially there are a lot of opportunities out of this disruption of COVID. Thank you. Now let me move on to Dr. Ilan. You are the economist, and you made those graph of V and all those alphabets, and the whole world is hoping we settle onto something and see where the recovery is going to come from. But if you look at the immediate trend, I talked about emissions decline, but as economies are opening, we are seeing the same trend of going back or rushing back to the old level. Um, what is how do we change that? How do we avoid that risk of missing this opportunity when trillions of dollars have been committed, and a lot of it will come to the energy sector to make it really, as IMF has called, greener, fairer, and more resilient.
Yeah, and the previous speaker, Hong Ping, said that this is a wake-up call. The problem with the wake-up calls is that once the immediate crisis passes, people fall back asleep. So we wake up and then we fall back asleep, and it is incumbent, I think, on us, on the participants of this conference, to sort of keep banging on the pots and pans, so that people don't fall back asleep. And we keep our focus on achieving what we think we all want. We all share those goals of resilience and climate change, and we've seen that in the polling results. There is no silver bullet here. There is no one way in which we can overcome these barriers to a build back better policies. And I think it is always true that the details are what is important. And here it is us, all of us, collectively as communities and societies, and of course the people who work in this sector, who need to push and continue and push and argue for the right policies. And I don't see any other way to do it.
Thank you. And I think that you have, I could not agree more with what you just said. And so the audience, you already heard, it's all of us, it's incumbent on all of us to keep, when there is a wake-up call, let's hope everybody is still widely awake when recovery phase is on. Now next, I move to Sujata and Priyanta. It's a joint question to both of you. Sujata, you seem to suggest that ADB is already doing what it should do in terms of moving these countries onto a greener and more resilient path. But is there anything we had learned, or is there any new thing we could do or push forward in our DMCs? And if that is there, what it is in your opinion?
So, yes, I would stay with my thing that ADB is doing what is the right approach. Of course, we can intensify it more. And as Priyanta said, there are certain ground realities. As the survey shows, there is the issue of access. So first, people want energy. And Dr. Noy, that's how it's going to go back. The wake-up call is not going to be there, and people will gradually go back. So what we can do is, yes, there would be an increasing trajectory in terms of energy demand once the world recovers. But it can be a flatter trajectory, it can be a cleaner trajectory, and that's where ADB has to intensify its role. So we need more resources, we need more concessional resources to be able to put, especially our poorer DMCs, the ones who lack resources, on a lower growth trajectory, and yet meet their demand. So it's not a compromise on the end use.
Thanks, Sujata. Priyanta, your reflections on the same point.
Yeah, actually, I agree with Sujata. More or less, the ADB is in the right direction. And for the last, few years, we have been concentrating more and more on cleaner energy interventions and supporting clean energy, more private sector investment. So we are in the correct direction, we are in the correct path, but probably we have to intensify, as she quite rightly said, and also give the leadership. sometimes the governments vacillate when they are short of money, when they are, in a crisis like COVID, they may not take the right decisions unless there is somebody to back. And this is the time that we can, provide that support, moral support for them to move forward in the right direction. For if I take an example, during this time, of course, I'm Sri Lankan. So Sri Lankan government has been getting in touch with me, not because of ADB, but because of my background in energy, on various things. And I was trying to push them, please do it this way, because this is the opportunity to get more private sector investment. Don't ask ADB to fund, wind power plants. Ask private sector to fund. We will fund the, park facilities, evacuation transmission lines. So the governments are gradually listening to these things. So it's our leadership and push which would really help. I think we are in the right direction, but more vigorous and more intensified push will help these governments to move forward faster and quicker.
Thanks, Priyanka. At this stage, let me go to David. David, if you can put up the audience question, please, to the panel.
Okay, thank you, Ashok. I won't be able to put them up, but I've been monitoring the questions, and we're getting quite a few. One of the questions that I think was quite interesting was one of the participants said, what is the balance between pushing technology or pushing policy? Because everybody likes to talk about the interesting technologies, but what about the policy drivers? So Ashok, maybe the panelists could respond to that.
I think that's a great question. So please, anybody who wants to answer that question, go ahead. Ilan.
I'm an economist, and economists are generally skeptical of the ability of policymakers to pick winners, but they strongly believe in incentives. So, making the incentives right, and for example, making the cost of carbon energy much higher, and then letting markets determine the technologies that are suitable for each situation. I think that is the priority, and therefore I would argue that policy trumps technology if we need to choose between the two, but I'm not actually sure we need to choose between the two.
Good point. Any other remarks or reflection on that?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
No, please go ahead. No, Priyanka, please go.
I fully agree with Dr. Noy. I mean, it's the policies which will set the scene for the technologies to come, depending on the cost of these technologies. You can very well see that with the feed-in tariff regimes coming in, and the cheapest of the renewable energy technologies used to come in, and then the next cheapest, then the next cheapest, and so on. So it's the policies can eventually decide, rather drive the technologies to come. So we don't have to choose the technologies.
And I think we are all saying the same thing. I don't see this as a choice between policy and technology. One supports the other. We can have all the policies in place, but if there's no technology, nothing will happen. And if we have all the technology, but the wrong policies, so I think they work in tandem.
Thanks, Sujata. David, next question.
Yeah, so another question, we've heard a lot about different numbers, both the amount of money that's required to meet climate goals in Asia and the Pacific. We have heard about trillions of dollars of stimulus, but the question that the person asks is, is there enough money out there to go into the energy sector, and how do we make it? How do we get it? Because sometimes projects fail, or there's not enough money. Countries need more and more. Sujata mentioned that as well, more concessional money. So is there enough money, and how do we orient that?
Again, anyone from the panel who would like to take that question first? Is there enough money out there? Sujata.
Mr. Hong Peng is raising his hand.
Yeah, Ashok, if I can just say, based on this last economic crisis, 2007 to 2008, Actually, the stimulus package in few countries, we can see at least there are some examples, from this package. For example, in Korea, 80% of the stimulus package go to environment and climate-friendly project. And even in China, there are 40% go to the energy sector to support the sustainable energy infrastructure. So I think this is only from a government package. But if you look at the private sector, I think that also have a much more kind of money. The issue is, for a lot of small and medium-sized business sector, how they can access this kind of money. So I think that's really we need the government policy and to find what is the best way, or even the ADB's support, to show there's a kind of effective way to support the SMEs. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Sujata, quickly.
To answer the question, there is enough money in the private sector. What is lacking is are enough bankable projects. And that's where I think ADB has a role to work with the governments to create an enabling environment for the private sector to be able to invest in, and also to look at what are the perceived risks with the preferred technologies. So I say perceived risks, to reduce that perception of risk associated with these more efficient and cleaner technologies.
Thanks. So I go back to David for another question, please.
We've all, the question is, everybody is being quite positive about the opportunity. Can you highlight some of the risks where responding to this crisis could really put us off track to meeting climate goals?
Yes, Ilan.
First of all, the biggest risk, I think, and we've already observed that, is that people now perceive this as a secondary issue. And the primary issue is the crisis. And rightfully so. The primary issue right now today is the crisis. But if we completely forget about the climate change, then we will, and we are making policies that sometimes are counterproductive. And I think that is the biggest short-term risk, that our focus will be exclusively on the current crisis rather than on our long-term goals. And if we don't focus on the long-term goals while we deal with the crisis, then we might put in place policies that will be damaging to the long-term goals that we are that we are shooting for. And we've seen that in my own country, in New Zealand. We've seen the government, for example, looking for infrastructure projects because they want to spend money, get money out the door for stimulating the economy. And sometimes the infrastructure choices that they have made is going to put various burdens on the future, which are counterproductive. The other problem is, of course, is this, and this ties to the previous question about money, is that we're going to use so much money now for the immediate emergency of the crisis that governments will feel later on that they cannot afford to spend more on for example, clean energy. And this is a serious risk because most governments right now are funding their emergency response to the COVID-19 crisis by borrowing. So long-term, is that what is going to happen to government budgets and whether they will be able to spend the kind of money that we think should be spent on clean energy is I think, still an open question.
Thanks, Ilan. Let us just take the last question, David, before we come to the end of this panel discussion. So last question from your side.
Great. So this is going a little bit the other direction. We've talked a lot about, I'd say, addressing vulnerable populations, and that's often through smaller scale projects. But can large projects such as carbon capture and storage installations be part of stimulus packages? Is this straightforward, or do you see issues?
Anyone would like to take that question? Big project versus a small, promising technology which are not yet there versus proven technology.
So at least in South Asia, it's going to be quite hard, as you know. At least in South Asia, it's not going to be that easy. CCUS is not a ready technology for South Asia at the moment, and we are still at a very preliminary stage of discussing these things with the governments, and they look at it very, very skeptically. This technology at the moment, because it costs a lot of money for them. It's a drain in their budget rather than any gain out of it. That's how they look at it at the moment, in short.
Thank you. Sorry, is that anybody else wanted to react on it?
Maybe on CCUS, I think if you look at all the carbon mitigation scenarios for the future, CCUS figures in a major way in those. So clearly it's a technology yet to be established, but I think, for example, China has the potential to test this technology and to experiment with this technology for the benefit of the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Sujata. That brings us to the end of the panel discussion. Let me say that thank you so much for all your insights and sharing your thoughts on some very important issues. In my opinion, there is no doubt that governments jointly will put in trillions of dollars in reviving the economy. And there is a chance that a significant portion of it will be earmarked for the energy sector. But despite the potential of green and clean energy for job growth and for driving the other sector of the economy, it is not preordained that clean energy will benefit from this stimulus package as well as we expect it to be. So I think this point was made earlier by Dr. Ilan, and I will reinforce it. We all have to put in more efforts to ensure that we don't miss this opportunity, but make it count. Lastly, friends, I have been attending Asia Clean Energy Forum since its inception, and for the last few years have been regularly moderating this panel discussion in the closing plenary. But as I sign off from ADB at the end of this month, let me take this opportunity to sincerely thank everyone, including the organizers of ASF. I will continue to take keen interest in Asia Clean Energy Forum and its objective to promote rapid deployment of clean energy in the region. And thank you again, all the panelists. We close the panel discussion.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ashok. Thank you to the panelists. That was extremely interesting. I really appreciated that discussion. And again, it brings us both optimism and challenge through that discussion. It's definitely going to be a lot of work, but I think it is a real opportunity. And I think this is a great time for Vice President Susan Tono, who's our Vice President of Knowledge Management at ADB, who really leads all our work on knowledge and is the head of this conference to bring this to a close with some final thoughts. So VP Susan Tono, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Ladies and gentlemen, clean energy colleagues, very good day to all of you. Let me begin with expressing my gratitude to Ms. Armida Ali Shabana, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and also Executive Secretary of UNESCAP. Her keynote speech reminded us once again of the important roles that we will all play in the post-pandemic economic recovery and long-term climate actions. We truly value ADB's continued partnership with the UNESCAP. Over the week, we have successfully held a virtual Asia Clean Energy Forum, overcoming the constraint of being unable to gather physically in one location. And we can say that during this global pandemic, we have found new and creative ways to learn, to share, and to find solutions to meet the sustainable energy needs of Asia and the Pacific We have conducted 21 sessions, 7 deep dive workshops. We partnered in 11 side events, covering a wide range of critical issues, such as the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on energy system and energy access, implementation progress of NDC, the nationally determined contributions, air quality improvement in urban area, low carbon transition in small island states, and energy system resilience. We have also showcased innovation in ADB projects and introduced ADB ventures that will support private sector startup companies. Our stakeholders have brought a range of views, all aimed at reaching a vision for sustainability. These were policies and regulations from government representatives, technology solutions from the private sector, collective interests of citizens, and many others from civil society organizations. As we close this year Asia Clean Energy Forum, I wish to share some reflections from the past 5 days on the role of clean energy to support post-pandemic recovery and long-term climate actions. Let me emphasize that we do not need to choose between economic recovery and clean energy, as the energy sector supports societies through this pandemic. Rather, I strongly believe we must do both. Increasing investment in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and many other technologies can be the response we need to combat the impacts and challenges of COVID-19. So let me share with you 4 points that struck me this week. First, on the innovative technologies. We need to continue to invest and use innovative technologies that are relevant as the energy sector transitions to clean and low carbon systems. Rather than business as usual, the recovery efforts from the impact of COVID-19 can create an opportunity to accelerate deployments of new technologies such as smart grids, battery technology, hydrogen, carbon capture utilization and storage. This will be important now and in the future energy system. Second, on energy system resilience. Renewable energy has shown remarkable resilience to the pandemic in major markets. However, in developing countries, many renewable energy projects were suspended or postponed because of transport and logistic interruptions and travel restrictions. We need to provide more support to the development of local manufacturing capacity and train local skills to ensure continuity in renewable energy development and production. This could in turn translate to more jobs and economic opportunity. Third, on financing issues. Energy utilities that were struggling with financial sustainability before the pandemic are now more vulnerable to financial shocks due to the impacts of COVID-19. Many of these utilities have suffered from lower demand, lack of customer payment, and other challenges. This is the time to assess how tariffs can be structured to support the most vulnerable, while at the same time to ensure that revenues are sufficient for the sustained operations of the utilities. Fourth, on the role of private sector. ADB's lending in the Asia and Pacific energy sector is about 5 billion a year, which is only a small fraction of the overall need. Mobilization of private sector and commercial sources investment are therefore very important. As we transition to the new normal, we can already see emerging opportunities for the private sector. There is now growing focus on remote access and automations, contactless transport, smarter and more resilient logistic and supply chains. Such innovation can help develop new models for deploying energy technology. The discussion we have this past week, especially on the review of energy policy ADB has in 2009, are important for us in ADB to work in Asia and the Pacific. While ADB Energy Policy 2009 has been instrumental in supporting our developing member countries, it is now time to revisit this policy. This year, Virtual ASEF has allowed us to conduct a series of consultations with stakeholders on the proposed reform to the 2009 energy policy. The views received were very helpful and reflect the new national and global agendas that have emerged in the last 10 years. We will continue the consultation on this topic for the rest of the year to ensure the relevance of ADB revised energy policy to serve the need of our developing member countries. This consultative process is also critical for the new policy to remain compliant with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, On behalf of ADB, I would like to convey our appreciations to our partners, the USAID and Korea Energy Agency, for co-organizing this virtual Asian Clean Energy Forum. Thank you also to our other development partner. The list is very long, and we are happy to see our partnership continue and grow every year. Finally, I wish to thank the 4,000 plus participants who joins this year's virtual Asia Clean Energy Forum 2020, representing our member countries, international organizations, development partners, civil society organizations, and private sector companies. I also want to thank all the speakers and panelists for their time, insight, active participations, and contributions in making this event a success. We truly hope you have gained valuable knowledge and new insight from your participations at the virtual ASEF 2020. With that, I now declare the 15th Asia Clean Energy Forum closed. Stay safe and healthy, everyone, and see you next year at ASEF 2021. Bye-bye now.